Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cabinet today, and can I welcome anybody at home who may be looking in or watching this in the future. I'm Peter Fox, Leader of the Council. Can I ask Cabinet colleagues to introduce themselves, please? Perhaps we can start with Liz.
Good afternoon. County Councillor Liz Hackett-Payne, Cabinet Member for Education.
Councillor Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader, Responsibilities for Enterprise, Leisure and Culture.
Phil Hobson, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community Development.
Jeff Burrows, Cabinet Member for Social Care, Safeguarding and Health.
Thank you, colleagues. Our opposition leaders have had to give apologies today, but Deputy Leader of Labour Group, Tony Eason, is here to represent the opposition leader. Okay. Welcome everybody, and I hope those of you who've managed to have a little break during the summer months have found it enjoyable and relaxing, ready for the busy time ahead, which always seems to, well, it never isn't a busy time, is it? But anyway, it's going to be starting very much from now on as we move forward into another year with a lot of challenges again. So first of all, let's go into the agenda then. Apologies for absence. Brian Jones is not well today, so he's given his apologies, and we have formal apologies from both Simon Howarth and Dimitri Petruni as leaders of the two opposition groups. Right, declarations of interest. Any declarations at this point? Any members who may be in the chamber? And if you find one, as usual, if you find one on the way through, can you please declare verbally and also fill in the pro forma as usual? Are there any at the moment? No? Okay. Right, item 3 then, we move into consider the following reports. Can I inform colleagues that both 3.1 and 3.2 have both been deferred for today due to further clarity needed on both scores, and they will be back with us, no doubt, in due course, but there is a need for further clarity on those two reports. It would be wrong for us to consider them without that information forward. So we will be starting then this afternoon on 3.3, and that's Caldicot Town Team Section 106 funding mechanism. Phil Hobson.
Thank you, Leader. As a consequence of the ASDA development in Caldicot, £225,000 of Section 106 funding was provided to enable the creation of a town centre partnership to support and develop the town centre and its business. Caldicot Town Team was created as a community interest company to undertake this role and has been drawing down Section 106 funding to facilitate one-off projects. This has, however, proved to be inefficient given the decision-making process required, which at times can frustrate long-term planning. In addition, the town team struggles with cash flow-wise to derive any great impetus behind individual proposed projects as a fledgling organisation, as it has no significant cash balances to allow it to bankroll expenditure in advance of requesting funding in arrears. The town team has gone on to develop an action plan, which is included in your appendix, based on 12 months of activities and projects, which has been shared with the Sevenside Area Committee and the town team membership. It is proposed that the required Section 106 funding of £41,000 to fund these activities is allocated and drawn down on a quarterly basis. Monitoring of their action plan outcomes and costs will be undertaken locally by the Sevenside Area Committee, with exception reporting only to Cabinet. Therefore, the recommendation is for the drawdown of Section 106 money of £41,000. Just bear with me a moment, I have a computer problem, Leader. Apologies. I'll leave it at that. My screen's gone blank for the moment. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Phil. I'll recap the recommendations before we move forward. So, yeah, thank you for that. And can I thank the town team for what they are doing there, and the whole community that supports them in what they're doing. I think this is a good way forward. I hope Sevenside Committee also think that's a good way forward. I think it's important to have that local challenge and scrutiny. I suppose for us, the one issue I would have, if I have any, is that whenever these significant lumps of 106 are not eroded but are used, it's important that they have a sustainable value and they add that value. So whilst schemes are really important to help regenerate the town, you know, I think it's important that the area committee do challenge robustly to make sure that there is an added long-term sustainable value from the investment it makes as it goes through its plan. And there are some good things in that appendix, some good plans, some good things that can happen throughout the year. So personally, I welcome the report and open up to colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And I think this is really a gesture or an indication of the faith that we have in the town team. They've done a tremendous job up to now under very difficult circumstances. Very, very open in their thoughts at the project boards. We've had very deep discussions about how they want to go and progress their ideas. As has been mentioned, there's in Appendix A, there's a whole string of activities that have been carried out and are proposed. And as I say, a gesture of faith in a team which is really trying to do something under very difficult circumstances in a town centre that desperately needs regeneration. So I think it's about time they have that opportunity of a little bit more flexibility.
Only with regards to the role of the Sevenside Area Committee going forward. Obviously, there is a review at present of local governance, and it might be worth mentioning that we'd like the Sevenside Area Committee or its successor to take on that role. But I know that the Sevenside Area Committee were very keen on that role of having an enhanced scrutiny of looking at the outcomes for the town centre that are being derived from that Section 106 funding.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was supposed to have said that, Jude, so thank you for bailing me out.
Yeah, no, thanks, Judith. Yeah, and whatever successor body, we've got some work to go yet to hone that down, but the area committee is a proven body. I think we'll carry out this robustly. I'm sure Tony might have a view as well. Tony?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I support the comments you're making about sustainability and the need to keep impetus up. But at the moment, I think town team are doing a good job, or attempt to do a good job, but I think they're treading water at the moment, quite frankly, because everything is focused around the town centre, and there's nothing happening in terms of the linkage scheme. The linkage scheme is the key to all this. We can pour money in month after month after month. If we don't get the linkage scheme going, this is going to be done in isolation, and all the impetus that the town team will put in there is going to be lost. We're looking for Wi-Fi links, we're looking for various levels of sustainability, but until we get something positive in that area, such as a linkage scheme, we've got to be very careful how much more money we keep ploughing into what I think town team are attempted to do, what good job the town team are attempted to do. So really and truly, it's supported from the Sevenside Area Committee that we scrutinise what's going on and give support to the town team, but equally we must get some decision on joining up the developments within the town centre so that this money is put to its best use. I think unless we get some direction on that, the town team are treading water.
And we agree, and that's why it's clearly recognised in the work plan, or on the second item there, Tony, about Caldegot linkage scheme and the importance of creating that attractive and accessible link between Yazra and our town team. And we all know the importance, fundamental there. Phil, you've got some section.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Judith may want to supplement what I say here, but my current understanding, and I'll be corrected if events have overtaken me, but my current understanding is that it's fairly and squarely with the London and Cambridge properties, who just have some legal I dotting and T crossing to do, and we should be in a position to award the contract. We are desperate to get this off the ground in the very, very near future, because we don't want it to run into Christmas again, because we know what will happen. The traders will ask us not to do it, and it will be delayed yet again. So as far as I know, from an MCC point of view, it's ready to go. It's just London and Cambridge need to action their bit. And I don't know whether Judith wants to add anything to that.
Judith, if you've got anything further to add, please. Yeah.
Only that my understanding is, as Councillor Murphy's, that it's been progressed with all possible impetus from the MCC end, and we hope to see some movement on that very shortly.
No, you're quite right, and Tony, you're quite right, and we all recognise, you know, there's such an opportunity there with Asda at the moment, the footfall that is potentially there, and it's not being utilised because those linkages aren't right, and it should be. It's so close, everything, it just needs that joining up, and let's hope that happens sooner than later. So points well made, Tony, points well made, everyone. So, okay, so the recommendation is that the Cabinet agrees to the allocation of 41,000 of Section 106 funding to Caldecott Town Team, payable in quarterly instalments to enable the delivery of the activities and outcomes as identified in the Town Team Action Plan, and that the Sevenside Area Committee be tasked with reviewing Caldecott Town Team's performance against spend and outcomes as outlined in the Town Team Action Plan also. So all in favour of those recommendations? Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Judith. Okay, let's move on to the next report, and that's the Youth Offending Service and its restructure. Councillor Jeff Burrows.
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, can I thank Jacqueline Richards, our service manager, for this very well presented report. Thank you, Jacqueline. The Youth Offending Service, as we all are aware, provides a vital preventative service that continues to serve us well. In conjunction with our partners Torvine, it's been an effective backstop that has contributed to helping vulnerable youngsters avoid poor life choices that would be costly to both them and the community at large. That said, the service, though, is not impervious to financial pressures of service delivery. So the report details today, in my view, a thoughtful, proportionate set of proposals to manage through the increased difficulties that grant reductions are imposing. There is one significant area of concern, though, and those are the comments coming from Torvine and their expressions relating to their financial contribution going forward. It's a little surprising because the evidence suggests that they avail themselves of the service to an even greater level than we do, and the principles of preventative work agenda should be as effective for them as it is for us. The partnership funding is secure for this financial year, but I believe that this would be an opportune moment for us as a council to engage with Torvine, with both their officers and political colleagues, to reaffirm our support for this shared service, and to come to an agreement on how it should look in both the short and medium-term future, and to work together to ensure it continues to be fit for purpose. We all talk about the value of preventative work and how such actions save higher, more costly levels of intervention at a later date. There can be no other service, in my view, that patently demonstrates this principle more. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and I echo those sentiments, and welcome, Jacqueline, and thank you for the report. And is there anything you'd like to add to anything at the moment? No, we maybe a question or two afterward. Yeah, this is really important. It's massively important. The preventative agenda can never be, should never be looked at lightly. Recognising the effect it has on those young people in this case, but also then other services as they have to pick up the results of under preventative work. And so, it is with a heavy heart that we have to recognise that a restructuring is needed to align to the funding resource which is shrinking. I think, Jeff, you make some fair points around, I certainly had some concerns when I saw the indication that Torvine may be changing their position. It's hard for them. We understand that as well, and I'm pleased that they've continued to honour the agreement as set. But I think it is right and proper that we do have a conversation to make sure that we understand exactly where we are on this service going forward, because it is something which is very precious and precious to our, to our county as well as theirs. So I think that's really important. I know the restructure has been thought through. I had the benefit of a conversation with Jacqueline recently to understand the outcomes of this. I think I'm also meeting tomorrow the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'll be also talking to him and reflecting on this, because obviously their budgets are stretched as well, and it's a knocking on into the service, and I think there needs to be a holistic perspective of what this sort of these constraints are going to be having on this type of service. So the structure is the many appendices are attached. Colleagues, anybody wish to add further? No? Okay. Tony? No? So no points further forward. So I know, Claire, you will be talking to colleagues in Torvine, so we can have that deeper conversation. Jacqueline, thank you for the report and bring it to our notice. And the decision, the recommendation rather, is that members approve the proposed restructure of the Youth Offending Service. Are we all in favour of that? Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacqueline. Okay, so now we move on to the effectiveness of council services, and that's a Q1 update. Members, some of you, I'm not sure if it's available for everybody who's in here. There is a summary update of a more national position which was released this morning, which is obviously has a direct link to what we're talking around today. There's a sheet added, and I think they may be coming round from Matthew, which just gives a brief summary. Basically, it puts into a national context the information that we reflected on in July at a Monmouthshire level of Q4 of year 15-16, and then puts that into context along with other authorities, and it would be remiss not to just point you to that summary was reflecting on our own Q1 results, or rather data indicators. So yeah, this is the first quarter update on council performance so far in 2016-17 against the measures on the Cabinet dashboard, which you will see below, and the indicators from the National Performance Indicator dataset. The report also targets includes the targets for 2016-17, which we need to affirm or otherwise, which we will be looking at to approve a little later. This morning, some of you, as I've just mentioned, will have seen the publication on the data sets, and that's before us now. And you will note that this was embargoed for publication until this morning, so we didn't have an opportunity to get it to you prior to. We've got this note which gives us some reflection around that. I'm pleased our continued focus on service performance is reflected in us overall being still amongst the top performing councils in Wales. We looked at the year-end performance information at Cabinet in July, and Monmouthshire's data was scrutinised by the select committees in June and July. And I think it's fair that we don't need to spend too much time on that. We've got this information which puts the things into context. What's important now is focusing on the future, and I know we will have a few questions on this Q1 position, because there are some areas in there where we aren't perhaps where we would like to be at Q1. We know that Q1's figures can sometimes be distorted, and there will be significant change by Q2, but we think we need some reassurances around some of those areas. I won't go through them. They're quite obviously bullet pointed out in the report clearly from 3.3, picking up those key areas of delayed transfers of care, some of that reduction in performance in children's services at some of the key indicators, something around our internal sickness and absence, staffing issues which we need to understand, and obviously disabled facility grants, which is an area which is of concern to all of us in the council, and we're looking forward to that deeper piece of work which helps us to address that issue going forward. Richard, author of the report. Richard, is there anything you need to add further before questions? Okay, great. So I think, as I said, that it's quite clear where our shortcomings are. It's great that there is still strong movement and performance in many areas, but we do recognise as resources are shrinking and pressures coming on that we are seeing a reduction in certain areas. I think that's expected. However, we need to make sure we've got all the information we need to give us reassurance that we are doing what we can to address areas where there is our weaknesses, or we are not quite where we should be. I'm sure colleagues may have a couple of questions. Perhaps I'll kick one off, because I'm, from a corporate perspective, I am quite concerned, as we all would be, about the levels of sickness and absenteeism. And I wonder, Peter, if you could give us a view and give us some reassurances about our position and what you feel the trend might be.
Thank you, Leader. I take on board Cabinet's concerns, I guess, with regards to the sickness absence levels that we reported in 2015-16, and clearly a deterioration of the position that or the successful position we'd reached the year prior. I think even before we reached the end of the financial year 15-16, we were aware of the situation starting to emerge, and we've taken steps through the back end of last year, and they're continuing on through this year as well, to make sure that we've got a firm grip on our position going through the year. I think it's interesting just to reflect, I think, on what underlies the sickness absence data from last year, which is seen through, I guess, a lot of the sickness absence relating to long-term sick cases, and a second issue relating to, I guess, an increase in those staff who have been off sick as a result of stress and psychological reasons, not necessarily work-related, but worthy of note anyway. So, I guess in terms of our response to that, we have met with management groups to better understand, I guess, as to where some of the frustrations are lying in terms of being able to manage those situations through and make sure that we provide ultimately the duty of care that we need to our staff, but also to make sure that they return to work as soon as they are capable of doing so. So through all of that, we have focused our attentions in terms of providing more support around well-being. So our training programs have provided a particular focus into those areas for our staff, and in terms of managing some of that stress, psychological issues. Further to that, we've rolled out a further program of work in providing specific sickness absence training to our managers, because ultimately they are key in all of this. They are naturally the contact point for these staff who are off on sick, and if well managed and certainly preventatively, that sees an impact. We are going to start to take a look at the quality of the counselling services that are provided to staff, whilst they are off on sick, and making sure that we have a level of reassurance in terms of that. But we've also done work at looking at our systems, I guess, and making sure that they are fit for purpose, and they are allowing managers to keep on top of the data and the sickness absence data, but also to be responsive to that as well. But ultimately, I guess, and in terms of the teams that I manage, and I guess the HR team particularly, is making sure that their efforts are properly targeted. I think some of the feedback that we've had from managers is that at times the advice that is provided is sometimes inconsistent. Sometimes it is not as timely enough to ensure that some of those long-term sick cases are expedited as necessary. So there's a whole package of actions that are in train, and I'm comforted by the good work that's going on. And I guess the only caution I would urge is that the Q1 data that we see is sitting well within the target that we've set for 16-17. However, Q1 is always seen to be lower than the year-end position. So it's a situation we need to very closely manage, and with a particular focus, as I said, on long-term sick cases and those with stress and psychological reasons.
Thank you, Peter. I get some reassurance about that, because it is a great concern to us. You know, our staff, we've said this lots of times, our staff are our greatest asset, and it's a concern to me if, you know, if there are things in place which are, or circumstances which you know, which aren't, you know, which are making them ill, or they're feeling that, you know, it may be outside of work life. We recognise that as well, and you know, that counselling service is really important. I'm pleased that we've got a hard focus on that. I know colleagues, I'm sure you also have questions there. There are some, you know, significant areas here which we do need to challenge and feel comfortable that we are heading in the right direction. Can I open it up? Bob and then Jeff.
Yeah, I accept these figures are quarterly, but you can't but notice the amount of time it is now taking for us to deliver disabled facilities grants. And there may be something in the fact that it is just the first quarterly figure. And actually it doesn't fit with anecdotal evidence that I've received very recently from people who have received multiple aids to living at home in really very short periods of time. So have we an explanation of why this has jumped up in the number of days the average is taking us to deliver these grants?
Yeah, I can answer that. Thank you, Councillor Greenland, for the question. And I think it's quite an easy answer. It's actually the backlog from last year. So when our funding is committed and we've got the right number of cases that we can deal with, the PI clock starts ticking until the next round of funding is made available in the next financial year. But whereas that looks as if it's a long time frame in Q1, what you'll see now is lots of activity where we're approving those cases with the new funding. So that position will now start to change at the second quarter. When you have that second quarter evaluation, you will see that reduce drastically. I suppose that does mask a bit of an issue in that funding is used up very quickly in the year. So because of the number of kind of high-level, complex, multifaceted cases that we are seeing, there are lots of children's cases, there are lots of complex cases where people are in and out of hospital. We've had a few deaths, which obviously means we have to stop work. The nature of the work we do is very specialist, so that requires specialist contractors. So, you know, we do see all kinds of complexities, and obviously a wait is undesirable on many levels, but we try and intervene with a number of different programs. We've got the Core Care and Repair program, we've got the Safety at Home program for more minor aids and adaptations. And I think, you know, we're about to hear that we've been successful with some more funding from Wales Government, which will help us top up and accelerate the number of DFGs that we're able to do in this year. So we should see some inroad into the figure that we reported last year.
Did you want to come back on that? No, it's fine.
Just to say that, yeah, I can understand that some of the more complex cases are going to take longer, if for no other reason than other agencies will have to give permissions and that sort of thing. So I can understand that, but I do think it's an area where we need to keep a careful eye going forward.
Yeah, and I also thank you, Kelly, because, you know, I'm still wrestling with this one, and I know there is work going on in the organisation. It's going to be quite key and fundamental to have that information forward, because clearly we are moving into the next budget round, and I'm sure this is something that we as Cabinet will want to have a really important look at, and we need to understand that you can't do things knee-jerk here, but we do need to understand the position, and because in fairness there could be complex cases in any council anywhere, but I do absolutely understand the points you've made, and so I'm looking forward to that piece of work, and I recognise that Select had done some analysis, some work, and probably doing some more. I'm not 100% sure, but I noticed in March, in the final report in March, there's some work on around there. We look forward to the feedback from the deeper discussions which have surrounded DFGs, because and I'm sure something will come before Cabinet in due course, and certainly alongside the budget side of things. But Claire, did you want to come in on that area a bit?
Just to echo really what Kelly is saying, that matching need and demand, given our demographics, is really, really difficult within the resource constraints that we have. Obviously, making sure that the system is working as efficiently as possible, that our procurement processes in terms of contractors is as effective as possible. And within all of that, then being able to have that sensible discussion about what that size of budget really needs to look like, bearing in mind that you can have a complex children's case or a run of those, and it can really take a big chunk out of the budget. Making sure, as Kelly said, that we've got the right level of more preventative services. It's good to hear that people are getting aids and adaptations very quickly, that our joint equipment stores arrangements are working effectively. But, you know, it is a big issue given the demographics that we're facing. So the more analysis we can continue to bring back to inform that debate from both a social care and a housing point of view, I think is very important.
I was just going to, Claire prompted something actually, and I think along the lines of prevention, it isn't just about DFGs. I think when there is a problem, we've got to get on the front foot, I think, and some of our housing policies are really effective. So, for example, for any new affordable home that's built in the county, we require that affordable home to meet lifetime home standards, which means they can be easily adapted very quickly. They have low-level lighting, they're ready for things like hoists and special carrying equipment. Chairlifts can be fitted very easily and cheaply. So homes are ready to be adapted, because obviously at the moment when we're going into existing properties, especially in the private sector, there is a cost to adapting those homes, especially around major conversions. So we've got to get on the front foot as well and be very prevention focused and make sure that we're impacting our policies right across the board, not just our policies to deal with disabled facilities grants.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I know Liz and I were talking earlier, and maybe taking Liz's point, but I think we've all experienced cases where there have been a real immediate need for support. For, I don't know, it could be a terminal situation, and the funding, the resource isn't there to be able to administer and to help through those difficult times. And I just wonder if there is a way that a portion of monies ought to be ring-fenced for those emergency type situations. I know that then perhaps starves the pot, and certainly if it's not utilised, I'm sure it would always be utilised at the end. But it's really, really difficult when we find families in that situation where perhaps there is only a few months, and the need to help out there is so important. Where we haven't got the means then to address that, we need to find solutions to that. And perhaps we have got some of those solutions, but do we articulate them well enough, or So I think I would like to see us bearing that in mind, also in that deeper thinking around the DFGs. And cool, I know there's other Jeff wants to come in then, Liz.
Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, I really just want to reiterate the point about the importance of this, because after all, vulnerability is a cornerstone of what this council stands for, and this is, there are a few things that we hold more dear than looking after individuals that are suffering with severe issues. I mean, for me, I was actually at the Select Committee meeting in March, and I was taken very much by the understanding that the members of the Select Committee had that this is a very complicated issue. It's not just about money and throwing money at it. There are all sorts of issues that actually pan out here in the time taken for occupational therapists to get a full understanding and get assessment of need. You then have things like planning application issues, and then getting specialist fabricators, construction engineers to actually do some very expensive and some very detailed work. So really, for me, it's just really a question of really urging that plan by the Select Committee, which is actually identified in their recommendations and outcomes, indeed, in the last report we're having today, that they were going to undertake conversations with both planning and social care, just to really get a really full understanding, in order that scrutiny can do what it does best and actually inform Cabinet about what their thoughts and their ambitions are for this very important subject. So I welcome and urge that work as soon as possible, because clearly time is moving on. We have our own plans about what we want to do with this, but informed decision making is the best type of decision making there is. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Oh, not on this. No, well, I think you've heard the messages on DFG, and I think we've had some reassurance, and we hope that money comes forward. We should know pretty shortly, and that'll help a little bit.
Yeah, we've been informed that we've got at least £100,000 worth of new Enable funding. It could
Right.
be slightly more than that. We're waiting to hear, but we'll know that by the end of September,
Yeah.
and we can use that information then to inform the
Yeah.
review that Councillor Burrows references.
Okay, thanks. Let's leave that, park that one now for, and there's a couple of other areas I just think we need to get some reassurance on. Liz? Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I just wondered if I could ask Sharon about free school meal attainment gap that has narrowed in the Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, but it's widened in foundation phase, and I just wondered if you could reassure Cabinet of the actions that we're taking as an authority to narrow this gap.
Thank you. Certainly this year, our processes of monitoring, tracking and setting targets for pupils have been more rigorous than they have been in any other year. The challenge to the EAS has been extensive, and challenge advisors and CAs have been to schools to look not just at individual pupil level as an overview, but scrutinise targets, evidence, provision and interventions that are in place to ensure that the pupils in Monmouthshire aspire to achieve the expected level, but at very least ensure that they achieve their potential. So this year we have had a number of stock takes which has involved Cabinet member and officers, where we've met with schools, we've scrutinised their individual results, we've monitored the progress of the pupils throughout the year, and we find that we still have a gap in free school meals. Our overarching targets this year were very high. We are very close to achieving those targets, so we can be confident that the majority of almost all of our pupils have achieved their potential. That doesn't necessarily always translate into everyone achieving the actual expected outcome. Nevertheless, we do know that the free school meal gap this year is due in part to a change in the number of pupils who are free school meals at point of target, and the number of pupils that were actually free school meals at point of sitting their end of year teacher assessment. Quite significantly this year, a difference between 78 and 111, which can have quite an impact on the overall percentage. We accept absolutely that we need to secure further improvements. We know that we have processes in place, and this year we will have further support through our regional policy addressing schools where outcomes are unexpected, that is above 3 or 5% difference from the actual projected targets. The process for that will begin very shortly. We'll continue with our challenge with the EAS and the challenge advisors and the work that they are doing in schools. And generally, we will monitor that. We do know, however, that there are a couple of schools where there is further work to be done. We know where those schools are and we know which pupils they are, and we will track those rigorously and hold the schools to account.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. I'm really pleased with a lot of our figures on education. You know, it's good, but that's really important to us, that area. And thanks for that reassurance. I know. Yeah.
Can I just?
Do you want to come in on that one if you want?
Yeah. But just to say that I'm reassured by the last few words that you said. We know the schools and we actually know the pupils. And that's the difference over the last few years. The amount of data that we're getting back enables us to get in there and really target those that we're missing. That's really good news.
Jeff?
Yes. Thank you, Leader. It's just a quick one, going back to one of the other aspects, and it's really a little seek for assurance from Claire in respect of the delayed transfers of care. This authority is well versed in matters of integrated working with health, and delayed transfers of care may be issues for other people, but it's certainly not one for this county. My understanding that there was a certain degree of misappointment of data in the last financial year, which was indicating that it was a worse case than it actually was. So really, in the round, I'm just seeking assurance that it is not as it seems, and that we are managing quite happily with this, and that our priorities, frankly, are elsewhere rather than delayed transfers of care. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I can provide that assurance to Cabinet. Looking at the delayed transfers of care for the last month, I'm pleased to report that we actually had 0 delayed transfers of care in Monmouthshire, which is a fantastic achievement and where we would always want to be. We were unfortunate last year in that there were a number of delayed transfers of care reported against us as a county for non-Monmouthshire residents, and that showed in our figures, which shouldn't have, and placed us in a position compared to the rest of Wales, which wasn't actually then an accurate position. So I'm pleased to say that our integrated services continue to be as effective as we need them to be for our citizens.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just another point which was highlighted in the report, and it's something which has been, it's persisting. Why, we're still got a bit of a shortfall on some of our children's services PIs. Are we going to? Is some light at the end of the tunnel on some of this soon?
Yes, I think there is. I think when we've presented the papers around children's services improvement to Cabinet and to Council, we've been very honest and open that this is a long-term programme, that changes and improvements are starting to be made to practice, to commissioning, and to getting in place a sustainable and permanent workforce within the service, but that it will take a number of months and indeed years for those changes to really be sustainable. When we're looking at how that translates into our performance indicators, I was just looking on the dashboard now, and at the end of July, there's one performance indicator which continues to cause us particular concern, which is around lack statutory visits happening in a timely way, but all the other indicators are indeed on track and in a far better position than where they were this time last year. Jane, as new head of service and children's services, have really put in place systems now to make sure that they're on top of where they need to be around those performance indicators through operational team manager groups, through redesigning the way that business support works to support the social workers to make sure that they're doing the work in a timely way, and obviously with that approach around quality assurance and focus on practice needing where it needs to be. The lack statutory visits is one which is very dependent on the systems working in the way that they need to, so that social workers can plan and have those visits in the diary. It's not that the visits aren't happening, they're just not happening within the timescales to the extent that we need them to be. So that continues to be a key focus for us.
There was another one in the national stats where it showed we've got quite a lot of our looked after children seem to move school quite a lot, and not quite sure why that is. It's remarkably different to some of the others. Any reflections on that, Sharon?
I think the reasons for children becoming LAC can be wide and varied, and the reasons why they move can be varied as well. Maybe their placement isn't necessarily suitable for them, and they are moved on. Circumstances could change. They may wish to move a bit nearer to where they've originally come from. It can be a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I can send that. I know Liz and I have had a chat about it. I think we want to understand that a little bit more in Monmouthshire context. Claire? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, on those non-transitional school moves, it's exactly as Sharon said, really, that children will come into the looked after system. That might necessitate a move. If then the placement they come into when they come into looked after isn't the permanent placement, then there'll be another move. And, the assurance that I can give is that we've got confidence that those moves, when they happen, because the placement is moving, are in the interest of the child. But obviously reducing the number of moves and getting the right placement quickly, if it is going to be a long-term looked after placement, is absolutely imperative. But we do know those individual children, and that's the assurance that I can give you.
It's just that when I was looking at, the percentage was significant, and I know those complexities again would be replicated in other authorities. I suppose whilst we've still got a significant number, a smaller number of looked after children would distort that percentage as well. I understand that as well, but we need to. I think we need to. It is right and proper that we understand that. So thank you both for that. Okay, I'm going to before I move to, I want to just check down the targets in a minute, but perhaps to give you chance, Tony, did you want to reflect on this opposition perspective on any of that?
Yeah, just two brief comments. The first one is about the transfer of care. I've got the details in the car of this as a meeting tomorrow morning at the Community Health Council. I'll try and pick up with Richard some of the facts and figures on that. The second one, I'm pleased to see that our recycling rate in the last quarter one has reached 70%. Last year, I believe we were third in Wales at 62%. And if we can maintain a high rate for this rest of this year, we should hopefully retain the top 2 or 3, or even get better. Because we see on the news some other local authorities are in difficulty getting their recycling systems in place. We've got one working now, and we're reluctant to change it through strong communities. And we're also looking at trials of glass, of separating various things. So it's a good move, the 70%.
I think it's interesting actually when you spend some time to try to interpret the figures between councils, because there doesn't seem a lot of correlation. So you can have one council which has the lowest amount of municipal waste going into landfill, yet you would suggest then that they must be the highest recycler. But it doesn't lend, and I wonder, so where's the percentage which isn't going into either? Where does that go? So sometimes some of the figures, I would love to spend some time sitting with the data unit and challenging just a bit about how these figures don't correlate, because you can't have one side of the thing and be a different thing the other side of the equation. They should, correlate at some point. But anyway, that's just an observation on one or two I picked up when I was looking through the national stats. And Richard, I'm sure you'd love to reflect on it. Would you like to reflect on any of that?
Just in terms of recycling, there is another measure which we may choose to actually introduce into this, which is around waste going to energy as well. So we've got recycling rate, landfill rate down, waste use for energy, which may explain some of that difference in terms of the gap. I don't know, Roger's got anything to add?
No, Richard's got it exactly right. It goes, you've got recycling and reuse, you've then got energy from waste, and you've then got landfill as well.
Okay, so that might explain it then. Yeah. I still want to interrogate it to understand it a bit. Okay, right. Yeah, so thanks for that. I think we're taking some reassurance around some of those key areas. The other recommendation is just check through if we believe we've got these targets right here. I haven't got a lot of problems with these targets. Obviously, the one which really, there's a marginal decline, but most things are marginal improvements. But obviously, the number of days for DFG, that's a massive red there. But obviously, this is quarter one. We've had that discussion. Anybody got any points on the targets, or officers? Have you got anything you want to point to us around the targets, or where you feel we should be advising advising us of any changes or not? Nothing? No? Okay, so we're reassured by that. So the targets as they are challenging enough in many areas. We've got to make sure that we keep our eye on those, and Cabinet do that via the dashboard and through the hub. So I'm going to take us then to the recommendations. 2.1 then, that Cabinet use this report to help their continuous monitoring and evaluation of the effectiveness of services and the extent to which they are contributing to the Council's priorities of the education of children, support of vulnerable enterprise and job creation, and maintaining locally accessible services. And 2.2, the Council uses this report as an opportunity to identify any action that may need to be taken to drive improvement. Insurance services are effective and efficient as possible in the context of current resources. That Cabinet approved 16-17 targets for national performance indicators, as we just discussed. And 2.4, that officers revise the Cabinet dashboard to reflect the changes to performance indicator requirements set in recent legislation, including the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the Future Generations Act, and performance issues identified as part of the Future Monmouthshire's programme of work as they are identified. Are we all happy with those? All in favour? Okay, thank you. Can I thank you, Richard, and Sian's not here, is she? But thank you for your work on the report today. today. Okay, so I'm going to move us on then to antisocial behaviour, something which never happens in this chamber, obviously. But, Phil.
Thank you, Leader. There's quite a lot to go through on this one, so I'll introduce the report, and then I know that Hugh Owen will answer any technical questions afterwards. There's bound to be some questions on this. The Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act in 2014 came into force in October of that year. The Act has repealed a number of powers and introduced a new range of powers to help tackle antisocial behaviour affecting communities. This report is concerned with three specific areas: community protection notices, public spaces protection notices, and closure notices. So the first one, the community protection notices, will replace such notices, previous ones such as litter clearing, street litter, graffiti removal. They're intended to be able to stop a person aged 16 or over, or business or organisation, committing antisocial behaviour which spoils the community's quality of life. They may be used to tackle a wide range of problem behaviours, such as mentioned previously, graffiti, litter, noise, etc. The behaviour has to have a detrimental effect on the community of those living in the locality, be of persistent or continuing nature, and to be unreasonable. The second orders are for public spaces protection. These replace designated public place orders, gating orders, dog control orders with a 3-year subsistence period from the commencement of the Act for existing orders in place. Currently, there are 3 of these in the county. One covering the whole of Monmouth Town, including Chipham Mead and St Thomas's Square, 2 in Abergavenny, covering Bailey Park and parts of the town centre, again controlling consumption of alcohol related to antisocial behaviour. These will automatically convert on October 20th of 2017, although the legislation does allow for these to be reviewed ahead of the transition to simplify the enforcement landscape. The fixed penalty notices are encouraged by Welsh Government as part of an effective and efficient enforcement approach for dealing with antisocial behaviour and environmental offences. In discharging any enforcement powers, it is good regulatory practice for an authority to set out its approach in an enforcement policy. The authority already has a corporate enforcement policy which applies good regulatory principles in line with the Concordat and has a specific policy for dog fouling, littering, which includes includes the service of those fixed penalty notices. In essence, this report is going to tidy up and bring into one realm all the existing notices and powers that are available to us. In the recommendations, it will amend the Council's constitution to give delegated authority to officers for enforcement powers introduced under the Act as set out in Appendix 1. The officers will be the Head of Public Protection, the Head of Waste and Street Services, and the Head of Governance, Engagement and Improvement. The second recommendation is to adopt the general approach in serving fixed penalty notices under the provisions of the Act as set out in the authority's existing enforcement policy for dog fouling and littering as provided in Appendix 2. And a third recommendation is to agree the fixed penalty notice enforcement charges as set out in Appendix 3.
Okay, Phil, thanks. Hugh, I'm sure you want to add a little bit more to this, or perhaps you don't, but please do.
Thank you, Peter. Well, just to add to the summary, this is looking to give the officers delegated powers which are introduced under the Act. One point I should make is that we're not asking for delegated powers to issue public spaces protection orders. If a department or section has intentions or an idea to declare a public space protection order, that would then require a report to Cabinet or to individual Cabinet member. So the delegated authority we're looking for is to serve community protection notices and fixed penalty notices in breach of a community protection notice. We're looking for delegated powers to serve fixed penalty notices in breach of a public space protection order. We're looking for delegated powers to serve closure notices for 24 or 28 hours, to agree the existing general approach to serving fixed penalty notices, which has been in place for a number of years for dog fouling and littering, to agree that that will be the procedure we'll follow for the fixed penalty notices relating to the new powers, and to agree the fixed penalty notice amounts, and the amounts proposed are in line with the other local authorities in Gwent.
Thank you. Obviously, I mean, we're not expecting these officers to go around and be flat out doing this all the time, would they? So, how are we still how are referrals going to flow to them? How are we getting the evidence? I mean, we're not going to be. Well, you share with me. How does this work?
It's just, in effect, giving teeth to a lot of work that's currently being done. So, for example, with community protection notice, at the moment, the Environmental Health Department may have complaints about the untidy state of somebody's garden. At the moment, we'll and for been a practice for years, we'll engage with that person, we'll encourage, we'll coerce them to sort in the problem out. We'll try and use legislation which may be available, such as Prevention of Damage by Pests Act, rats problems and that sort of thing. But this will actually be more specific powers that we can use. So we're not expecting a whole host of new sort of complaints or extra workload, just giving a little bit more teeth to it where it's needed. But as ever, with any enforcement powers, officers will be expected to use their judgment and full discretion.
Thanks. Thank you. I thought that would be the answer. I'm pleased about that, because it does give you, it must be frustrating when officers are persistently trying to address a situation and you haven't got the legislation to help you do that. And if this unlocks that opportunity for us to actually back up what we're saying we're going to do and enforce it, that's a good thing. And it's good for the communities we serve as well. So I welcome that. Colleagues, anybody wish to add? No? Sorry, Liz.
Just a very, very simple question. It's about when the order is, when you have to consult with the police and the crime commissioner and appropriate community representatives. Who would those be?
I think we would have to look at the specific guidance, and I think it would very much depend on the nature of the order that's been looked to be introduced. Now, these are cross-cutting powers that have been introduced, cross-cutting across a number of services in the department. So public space protection orders can cover a wide range of different issues, whether or not it's consumption of alcohol in a public place or whether or not it's control of dogs. And many other local authorities have issued public space protection orders for specific problems in their area. So I think the consultation with the community would all depend on either the guidance, but also the nature of the order would lead into the sort of people that you would consult with.
Thanks a lot, Hugh. Tony.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I won't say I'm a little confused, but you're removing eight orders. You're bringing in some more introduced orders, which don't seem to be full of clarity to me as to what they mean. The ones above, quite clear. Gating orders, dog fouling orders. A little more clarity. I can understand the officers having that responsibility and be able to give authorised fixed penalty notices, but I don't really see the words in there to say exactly what Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014 really means when you just got one or two paragraphs. It hasn't got the clarity in there of the offences, for example, fly tipping, dog fouling, and the latest one at the moment is looking after the levels, the living levels, which I know that the Waste and Countryside Service is looking into. So I understand the direction it's going to take, but I'm not quite confident in my knowledge of what you're talking about in terms of how they're going to enforce them. Do I make sense or what?
No. Hugh?
Yes, very good point. The whole intention from the Home Office, who introduced these powers, was to give local authorities a blank sheet of paper to be able to tackle the antisocial behaviour issues which are specific to that local authority. I think they were approached by a number of local authorities saying, well, we can't deal with this issue, we can't deal with that issue. And the orders which are being replaced perhaps didn't quite enable a number of issues to be tackled. The community, what the Home Office have in the legislation, however, is introduce a number of tests that must be met if, for example, you're going to serve a community protection order or serve a public spaces order. So, for example, for the community protection order, we'd have to be satisfied that the antisocial behaviour was having or likely to have a detrimental effect on the quality of life of those living in a locality. It would have to be persistent or continue in nature, and it would have to be unreasonable. So those are the tests that would have to be met, and appeal mechanisms to court if obviously somebody felt that a notice was incorrectly served. Difference between a community protection notice and a public spaces protection order is that the community protection notices are looking to deal with specific individuals who are impacting on a locality, while the public spaces protection order are where the local authority is concerned about a particular sort of behaviours from perhaps sections of the community that we want to tackle, such as the consumption of alcohol in a public area. But each of these orders have got specific tests. One last point I'd make is the reason why we would have to come back to Cabinet for public space protection order is because the public space protection order would affect the wider community and the behaviour of that wider community.
Thank you, Hugh. Okay, I'm going to then move us to the recommendations. And by the way, Phil pointed out Appendix 3, you'll see the fixed penalty level which has been recommended before us, and that's £100 payable within 14 days, reduced to 75 if paid in 10 days. We just note that because it's relevant to the recommendations. So go back to the recommendations, and they are in 2.1, as Phil captured earlier, to amend the Council's constitution to give delegated authority to officers for enforcement powers introduced under the Act. The officers are the Head of Public Protection, Head of Waste and Street Services, and the Head of Governance, Engagement and Improvement. And 2.2, to adopt a general approach to serving fixed penalty notices under the provisions of the Act as set out in the authority's existing enforcement policy for dog fouling, litter, terrain, and that can be found in Appendix 2, and the 2.3 to agree to fixed penalty notices are just reflected on. So all in favour of those recommendations? Great, thank you. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Andy. Okay, on to the last item. And pleased to receive this. I know Hazel can't be with us today, and we haven't got any select chairs here today, but we do welcome the work, and we thank the Select Committee for their continuous efforts and the really busy, heavy schedule they have of work to help us with our policy development, and obviously a lot of their time and pre-decision scrutiny is really important, fundamental part of the governance here within the council. There is a lot of activity. There has been a lot of activity through the year, as captured in there, and we do continually reflect on the outcomes of the work done from Selects. It's useful to get a reminder of some of that work here. I suppose if there was a point I would make is, whilst this is really useful, it's perhaps not timely enough. Sometimes when you're reflecting back on something which is 6, 7, 8 months old, why couldn't we do something very similar, but on a regular cabinet agenda, so we can have an update of what's gone on before over the last month or so. It keeps it nice and relevant and fresh in everybody's mind, instead of us waiting perhaps for a letter from a chairman of a select, which might be making a recommendation. So it's really important. For instance, until I picked up on here the work which was happening around DFGs in in the Adults Committee in March. I would have loved to have been part of that information a bit earlier. I wasn't invited to I wouldn't have gone along to that meeting. I wasn't invited along to that, but actually the outcomes of it would have been really, really important to me. So I think if we could have this on a more regular basis, it'd be really, really useful for us. That's my perspective. Colleagues, anybody wish to add further? No. But we do please take back, colleagues who who sit on Selects, that we do value the work that you're doing. We value the protocol which is in place. We hope it's been adhered to well. Now I know that chairs do occasionally write to Cabinet members with specific recommendations. We don't have those very often, however, and as you'll see evidence in here, there seem to be what would be recommendations, but they're not always followed up with a formal request to us. So, you know, I think we need to understand how and what's expected out of some of those things. But of course, we're constantly monitoring what happens in Select via the video streaming and access to obviously the information we do find between meetings and the like. So we thank them for their good work. So Tony, is there anything you want to add on this report?
Yeah, just one thing, Leader. Hazel hadn't mentioned in the report, and I think it's the decision we took at the beginning of this council was to reduce selects down to 9 from 11 to try and up the attendance. But the attendance doesn't seem to have improved like we would like to have done, and I don't think we've actually got to a meeting which has had to be called off because of lack of quorum. But it's numbers of commitment to select committees I think important, and that's something we've got to try and introduce.
I think it's absolutely. We've got a conundrum here. We've got to find a way through it. I think it would be right now, when we're moving toward the next administration, the next council, is something which we really do need to consider. What is the best shape of scrutiny? How are we going to do this in a different way, perhaps, which keeps people engaged and wanting to attend? I think there's such a volume of work, a volume of initiatives and expectations that this is, you know, it's a challenge for people, but I think it's a point really well made, and I think it is something we certainly need to be considered in May next year. Okay, so the recommendations are... Oh, sorry, Jeff.
Being right at the far end, I guess. Now, I just really wanted us to articulate just slightly about the point you're making, Peter. I think it's really right that we have a relationship as far as Select is concerned, and may I go so far as to suggest that whereas before we used to have a standing order item for Select reports, and obviously we weren't getting that many through, that maybe the way to deal with this is actually kind of reinstate some kind of standing item that captures the activity with the Selects that are happening in between our Cabinet meetings, so that if something does crop up, there is an early warning opportunity to be flagged up at Cabinet that something has been looked at and can be debated upon. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So perhaps we can take that back, have a chat with Hazel to see if we can have some similar but break it down. It'd perhaps be easier for her as well. If we can have it on a more regular basis, that'd be great. Okay, the recommendations then in 2.1 and 2.2 that Cabinet acknowledge the contribution made by the Council Select Committees toward policy development and decision making, and that Cabinet members familiarise themselves with the outcomes of the Select Committees to ensure they respond appropriately to recommendations and requests made by the Select Committees in line with the Council's scrutiny and executive protocol. I think we absolutely agree with both of those recommendations. All in favour? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you all for your attendance on this quite warm afternoon for September. And look forward to meeting again shortly. Thank you very much.